This is Senate Appropriations, and we're beginning our testimony on the FY 2023 budget adjustment. And so we have Commissioner Gresham with us today, and I'm going to, and you may have other staff as well as Hardy being here. So I'm going to have you introduce ourselves. We have two new members of this committee, which is really experienced legislators. So we're quite different than the House, which I think has got some very significant turnover, and some even members who are new to the legislature. So why don't we go around and introduce ourselves in case you might have forgotten who we are. How about you, Senator Westman, whoever you are?
I am Rich Westman, the Senator.
Hi, good to see you again. Ginny Lyons, representing Chittenden Southeast.
Yep, and Bobby Starr representing Orleans County.
Andrew representing Washington District.
And Andy's the new vice chair.
Dixon.
Oh, nice.
Dick Sears representing Bennington County and a few towns in Windham County.
And the empty chair is our pro tem.
Pro tem,
So as you can see, this is quite a lot of institutional knowledge sitting around the table.
Are you calling us old?
Well, no, experienced, I think, would be the seasoned. I'm sure some other words would come to mind, but actually, one of the things that we have the benefit of is that there are three other committee chairs who sit around this table. So just by our composition, we have really good kind of connection back to the subject matter committees, and that makes it so much better.
A little overload with agriculture this year.
Carol.
Yeah.
Carol.
Oh, hi, Senator. I'd like to also introduce our staff, and we have a new committee assistant, and Andrew Smith, and she is going to help us keep organized and scheduled, and Grady Nixon, who will make sure that we're putting together our budget documents and the BAA and other documents that the Joint Fiscal Office might produce. So we're really happy about that. And you know Sarah.
Indeed.
And, and of course Stephanie. And you want to introduce yourselves? Are they part of your staff, Commissioner?
One of them is.
Yeah.
I'm Nick Kramer. I'm a new analyst with the Department of Finance and Management.
And what areas of the budget are yours, Nick?
I cover A&R and the military and agency of ag, the treasurer's office, pension issues, and debt service.
Oh, okay. All dear to my heart. And
My name is Carla Molander. I'm with Action Circles.
well, thank you. So we have the documents, hard copy, the spreadsheet, and then section. So I'm going to, and I guess you could put yourself officially on record. And then I don't know what document you want to work from, but probably this one.
I think so.
Okay.
So thank you, Madam Chair. Adam Gresham, Commissioner of Finance and Management, and Hardy Merrill, Deputy Commissioner of Finance and Management. And before continuing, I point out that Nick Kramer, one of our budget analysts, is sitting to the left. You will shortly get a report per Act 114, I think, or maybe it was 185, one of the two required, and a report on the capital expenditure cash fund, the finance and management with joint fiscal and the treasurer's office are sent to you. It's predominantly Nick's work. I mean, he's just done some terrific work.
All right. Well,
You will
we're
shortly
aware of
see
that
it.
report. We know, and we think and we've had some discussion about it, and we need to get back because part of it was in consultation. So I think just to use this opportunity to think by the time to allow that exchange and consideration. We know that you're very diligent about adhering to the deadline of, I think, the 17th, but if it takes a little bit longer, we certainly would expect that and would want that to happen. So just to let you know, since you're here, might as well pass that information along. So
So
it's all yours.
we thought in light of, as the chair said, you guys have a bit of tenure on this committee. We thought in light of that, we would kind of go through a bigger picture and let you guys focus, in on what you prefer as opposed to going line by line. I don't know whether that would be your cup of tea, but I'll start off by saying, this budget adjustment.
I'd like to spend a lot of time on B 310, $5,835.
Well, okay, in that case, we'll start with B 310.
No, I mean, you're absolutely
Match
right.
non-waiver program. So, this budget adjustment, like last year's actually, the past couple of years, with a fair amount of revenue floating around. And this is an unusually large number of appropriations, many of which are, as I've described before, kind of a bookkeeper's dream, that we're moving amounts of money in between departments as we typically do, particularly within human services. So the number of line items should not necessarily signify kind of the change or the policy approach to it. Most of this is indeed just moving money around to where it's needed. However, there are a number of line items that we would welcome you to look at, and we will review. The bottom line at the end of all of this, with all this money that's moving around and coming in and going out, the bottom line actually is a net positive to the state, a small amount, a little over $1 million. That is virtually entirely due to the fact that we did not budget for the enhanced Medicaid match that we're receiving from the federal government for all 4 quarters of fiscal 23. So when you add the first 3 quarters at 6.2% enhanced Medicaid payment, and the last quarter at 5% enhanced Medicaid payment, it comes out to be roughly in the 86-7 billion range, as well as some other enhanced federal payments through our Medicaid office. But really, the net of it is, somewhere in the $130 to $140 million range of money coming in. Some of that is carry forward, some of that is reversions from carry forward. But the net, when we put that to work, it nets out to be a little bit more. I forget what it's 1.7 million.
And we had budgeted totally on that higher match, then we would have a very different scenario.
I think so.
80 million. So there are some big parts here moving. I
That's correct.
understand. Some of it's Medicaid, some of it, what we're really concerned about too, when we have in the budget, is some of our providers, particularly nursing homes, other healthcare PNMI, and there were rates set it on a very outdated year of 2019. And we're really struggling financially, and we are expecting, and if you could identify some of that connection with what we're seeing here, I think that would be helpful. And I understand the reach-up caseload is also
Yes.
another area of a significant up in this. So it's nice to know that we're coming out within $1 million plus in the bottom line, but it's certainly because of having those additional revenues that we've been able to accommodate some of these higher levels of spending. So if you could kind of run through what are some of the highlights, and then and we don't need to go line by line, but you certainly know what we'd like to
Sure.
understand a bit better.
And we'll spend some time in human services, as we always do. That tends to be the lion's share of the changes. But typically what our protocol has been, or our method has been, is Hardy and I tag team, and we just go down the list and
Okay.
just highlight what you guys might be interested in, and we try to skip over what we don't think is of interest. But you have this sheet in front of you, and so I figured I would yield to my colleague and start off at the top.
Sure. Well, I guess just to make sure we don't miss anything, the first adjustment to section B105 is essentially technical in nature. So the technology modernization funds were placed in ADS's base B105 section And the administration and joint fiscal office concurred that it would be more appropriate to have a one-time appropriation for these one-time projects. So you'll see a corresponding one-time special fund appropriation later.
So you took it out one place and put it in.
We did, yeah. And so you'll see that on the next couple pages. In B109, public safety, you can see the result of the Vermont Troopers Association collective bargaining agreement, which provides 8% payroll increases. That's a $3.3 million up, but it's also offset by an increase of the vacancy savings being budgeted by the state police, because unfortunately their vacancies are running higher than the levels that were assumed for the purposes of their budget. And at this point, halfway through the year, it makes sense to budget the realistic vacancy savings to offset the increased collective bargaining agreement costs.
Okay, but if they can get hiring back in the vacancies, then is this a one-time kind of move, or are you doing a base adjustment?
No, we're not. Well, of course, with the FY24 budget, see the vacancy savings that are budgeted in that year. We are not necessarily anticipating we'll never be able to hire troopers, but the point being, if we're 6 months through the year.
No, I understand that. I'm looking to the future,
Yes,
because
yes.
obviously the goal is to, I'm sure, to get as many of those vacancies filled as possible.
The same assumption is not being carried.
Yeah, okay. I assume that, but I've learned not to assume anything.
So the 24 budget.
The 24
will have
budget
all-
would go back to the normal vacancy experience. If you reduce the base based on this experience, then when you started hiring, then you wouldn't have the sufficient appropriation to cover those costs. That was all.
So the next two items move from one place to another in agriculture, food, and markets. This is purely a technical correction that, Madam Chair, you may recall when you signed the letter of legislative intent in warmer times. This is one of the items that was buried in there that we would expect to see in the DAA. And the Cannabis Control Board is receiving an increase to its appropriation being proposed based on the largest single line item is an increase in IT system costs, which you'll recall in the big bill, there were adjustments made already to increased costs in the IT system. And this year, those costs have continued to increase. There are a number of other line items that are involved in the net amount of $540,000. I would encourage you to seek further detailed explanation from the Cannabis Control Board on this. We merely relayed their request for data.
Just wondering about expense for new location. Is that an actual expense, or is that like fee for space?
So they have relocated from one office space to another, and to understand why, I could not explain that.
But it's more expensive.
But they did physically move from one location to another, and it's a change in the cost.
Okay.
It's not based on a change in rates, for instance, that there were being charged for fee for space. There was a vacation of one location and they moved.
I see, so
Yeah.
moving expenses as opposed to.
Well, higher rent.
Yeah,
in the new
but I
city
think it's
law.
not just a moving expense. I think you'll see this in the base in the future. The
Okay.
additional costs associated with the new facility, but I really would.
They brought in more staff too, so they may have had to,
Get a bigger.
maybe additional space or something.
But this is not, these are not changes that we questioned or vetted. We are really, representing them.
Really, you don't vet these at all? Just
well, you do ask questions, but, you know, as an independent commission and not,
You're not
a
lying.
board that, you know, you can change that. You can make it part of the executive branch.
We're the ones.
I think we'll move on to the next section.
So moving on to human services, I thought I'd just start out by looking at B301. That's the mixing bowl. And, you know, all that red that you see there, in this case, red is good in that it illustrates what I said a few minutes earlier, the additional revenue coming in. You notice there, for example, they freed up some money from carry forward. They had, many of our departments had substantial carry forward from the prior year. There's also some enhanced federal match for new adult caseload and utilization, or some enhanced federal match. And then, of course, the two larger entries, there are two large entries, the 67 million, that's for 3/4 of enhanced FMAP in FY23. And the 18 million number is for the fourth quarter of 23, the April to June. And you may know that part of what helped, I get the omnibus bill across the finish line was a somewhat earlier start to redeterminations that I think initially were going to start later in the year. The omnibus bill that passed in December in Washington allowed redeterminations to start in April. So presumably states will be able to lighten their loads or at least start the process of redetermining their caseloads. The give back on that was to step down the enhanced FMAP. So the fourth quarter of 23 will have, instead of a 6.2% bump, a 5% bump. The good news for us, even though that's a little less than 23, we would have gotten had they not stepped it down. Good news is there is going to be some enhancement in FY24. 2.5% for the first quarter of 24, and I believe
That's part of their step down.
Yeah. So that we did not anticipate. That was a positive surprise. But you see that 4 quarters, if you had 68 million and 18 million, I mean, that's fairly deep, about $85, $86 million in enhancement just from FMAP alone.
What is it? And MedBoss,
That's the data warehouse.
that's the data warehouse.
And where is that data warehouse?
Where is the data?
Housed.
Um,
I mean, we've got so much healthcare data. I'm just wondering,
Because it's Medicaid, I think it's in DEVA.
it's in DEVA. The backfill of Live donor fund from October, 5.8.
Yeah, so that's a little clunkily worded, I might
It
add.
sure is.
That's basically the 5.8 million. Remember, was it the e-board or J? I think it was e-board actually.
Yeah, it was e-board, yeah.
E-board, where it was agreed that Human Services would provide the money from anywhere they had the money, and it would be made up in
We would
budget
advance it
adjustment.
pending.
So they took it from the mixing bowl because they just have a lot of money there. They took it from there. Now
Which is uncommon. We've done that before in order to get the program and the first benefits at the higher level.
one thing I would highlight in B301 that may not be immediately obvious is an intergovernmental transfer for graduate medical education. That's the $9 million under Healthcare Resources Fund. So you guys are aware that I think it was 2010, 2011, sometime back when they started a program that essentially gave the University of Vermont access to our state Medicaid program. They would provide the state match amount. We would wash it through
And
the
that
mixing
came with some
bowl.
special language that if somehow we couldn't get the match, that what they had ponied up, they'd be protected.
They would get it back. So, you know, the problem I think has been that education costs more these days, and the amounts in there have been stale. So they're looking to gather more resources. So they are providing additional match. That's the $9 million that you see. That is coming from UVM Medical Center. And that is through the magic of mixing bowl turning into a $21 million global commitment appropriation, which is really.
Which is on the MCL side. No, it's not.
Right, it's like outside of the.
It's
It's just
outside the MCL.
Just straight global commitment. And that actually, you can see that in E307. So if you see the 21.217 million, so that's the kind of charge that comes from that.
Just
But
above the ground.
I just wanted to point that out. I mean, that's I don't know if it's a doubling, but it's close to doubling the size of that program. It's a good amount of increase, and we're very happy to do that for UVM. So within B301, we have a fair amount of revenue coming in, but we have some going out. We see that in the $34 or $35 million. The global commitment amendments, I mean, a lot of that is through additional spending for various reasons that you see further down in global commitment. So, we giveth and we taketh. Net for additional kind of caseload and utilization, about $45 million gross of spending. So I thought.
Is it, on that 43.8, and we'll have more information when Diva comes in, the split between caseload and where we were on the estimates and we may have had some assumptions about about reviews in that caseload assumption.
So the 43, we did when we first built the budget.
Yeah.
The 43 million here is the combination of both.
I understand that, but,
But it's also the consensus that we were reached as a group several months ago.
okay, so what is the split between caseload and utilization? In terms of the,
You mean in terms of the delta?
yeah, is it half and half or?
The DEVA detail will provide it actually.
Okay, all
I
right,
guess we're going through the consensus.
yeah, all right, I'll go through. Because sometimes your caseload doesn't change that much, it's the utilization that's really growing and driving the cost, that's.
When we first built 23 though, we did expect determinations to start, I think, at some point in 23, and that got bumped further out. So this is a bit more on the caseload side, I think, so far.
And then we had put something in, sort of knowing that that cost, that higher cost was temporary because redeterminations would kick in, so we used some one time
That's right.
anticipating, so,
10 million
yeah.
last year. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but you can expect a similar structure this year. But I thought I would also just point out a couple of kind of thematically that you'll see throughout human services and frankly throughout the budget. But one is inflation. I mean, it's just appears in virtually every department. I pointed, as you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned PNMI inflation.
Traveling nurse, 11.2 million.
Yeah, I mean, we have 2.3 million gross in B314. We've got it also in B314. You got the traveling nurses contract, $11 million. B338, we've got the corrections side letter that represents our desire to try to retain and attract more corrections workers. B342, that's home, nursing staff, same deal. So it's kind of all over.
So what
and-
did we do with our other nursing homes in here? Because obviously you've got money in here for the vet's home, you've got money in here for mental health costs. We know that we've had problems with nursing homes not being able to accept patients because of the staffing, and then they've been backing up in our hospital. So where would we find what you've done in the budget adjustment for putting some relief and some financial support, recognizing those higher costs? And that would be in Dale.
So part of the PNMI inflation adjustment is, gets along those lines.
That would be.
I don't know if we have any specific for nursing homes. although I suspect it's here. I mean, there's crisis staffing increases and,
Personal care.
you know, there's, yeah. That I think it gets along that same lines.
It's in 334.1, the one for Caroline.
Yeah.
There's a couple of $4 million global
Yeah.
commitment increases.
So,
Well, one's vets home and above, nursing homes, that's almost 5 million there.
On the emergency relief, but you also have some off-cycle rebasing.
And then rebasing of 4.3.
Yeah.
So it's almost 9 million then between the two.
What about the health, service and mental health and the VNAs? Is there any money in here for them additional?
oh, the money that's going to DMH is predominantly to fund their traveling nurse contracts, because they can't have the, I guess, the, what they can pay, they can't attract nurses, but there's
But you're
nothing.
talking about the community organization.
Oh, yeah.
That, not the psychiatric hospital.
Not that I know of.
We did give them an increase at the beginning of the year at 8%.
Last year, in the beginning of 23.
And that was.
You know, one of the areas that we're hearing from, and I know that this is, and that is the impact that Medicare Advantage plans are having on the provider communities. And Rich has given us some feedback from the VNA in Lamoille County and what it's meant in terms of cash flow or denied claims and the way in which they have a lot of outstanding claims and the impact it's carrying, you know, $25,000-$30,000 on a small agency is very significant. So one of the things you are well aware of, and I gather that this isn't, but I want to confirm it, that there's nothing in the budget adjustment that has anything to do with our proposal that is, to my knowledge, it's been deferred to July 1 or possibly reconsidered around moving retired state employees into a Medicare Advantage plan. There's nothing in the BAA, I assume, around that.
That's correct.
Okay. But will we find something in the budget, or you won't tell me until we get to the budget?
I'll let you know in a week. But there's nothing in the budget adjustment that addresses the Medicare Advantage. I mean, the chair is aware that the state has taken the initiative on that.
Everybody in this building is aware, the retired state employees have been here. The number of emails, I mean, and it's really been, it's been a little troubling because particularly the people that have got significant health problems have been just so troubled in their email. And I had, you know, my mother's 92 and she can't come today to tell you how important her health care is, or I had a stroke 6 weeks ago. I mean, these are the kinds of calls that we are getting.
Bone marrow transplant.
Of concern over the proposal that is currently in limbo that it has generated relative to health security, in all honesty, for the retirees. So you don't need to respond, I don't expect you to, but I'm just telling you from this perspective and what we're hearing from all around the state, savings can be achieved, but the impact of where those savings are achieved and how they're achieved is a very, very serious and pervasive concern. And we have, all of us have had the benefit of hearing that angst and concern.
So just since we've been sitting here, I just got from the director of my home health agency, United Healthcare, that with their snazzy TV commercials to lure seniors in, their rates are less than half of the other payers, and they refuse to negotiate with any of the VNAs. So we're hearing from all over the place.
So what I will say is I would welcome this committee to invite former DCF Commissioner Sean Brown, who now is working in the agency administration. He is very happy to come in and tell you what our plan is. I've heard the same comments that you have heard. They haven't been directed to me as part of the administration, but I can tell you we have a lot of information we'd like to convey, and we'd certainly like to address many of what we consider to be vast inaccuracies in the information listed around. So we'd be very happy to come in and
Well, this is from the impact on providers, and the part of what we rely on is some of the stability of those community providers to keep seniors and people with disabilities in their communities and homes. So sometimes when you look at one piece, gee, that makes sense, but what is it? What is happening? And, in a sort of a domino or collateral impact. So we'll go on, but you confirmed that there's nothing in the BAA here. And but when we were talking about community-based providers, we just triggered that. And obviously we're hearing from those providers.
so I went through quickly at Human Services, but if there are other questions, if not, we can move on to.
Is there anything in here on children's integrated services?
B318.
DCF, are you looking for something in specific?
Well, I see PNMI inflation per diem rates, that up to almost 1.9 million. Did you see that, Senator Sears? The PNMI
Yes.
rates were increased by 1.9 million,
So
which I know is a concern of yours.
Right.
that's also part of a DCF, DMH combined. Total is 2.3 gross.
There's two technical corrections.
But that had to do an inflation adjustment for per diem
Yeah,
rates. And
we still need to understand what they're basing the reimbursement and PNMI on. 2019 or the new reality.
they must have done, they must
No,
have
I think that's
rebate, I think it's.
I think that was part of it, how they came up with those numbers. Probably worth it from.
And the caseload pressures in general, resub is almost 7 million, 6.9. And that's all caseload driven.
It's caseload. And, that was for a number of years trending in the other direction. And it's recently started to trend higher.
So we keep going.
Sure.
We've kind of jumped around, picked out the big ones or where we have questions. So if there's something that we perhaps should go back to, Hardy,
Sure.
please direct us to the section or whatever.
Sure. So I guess if we're through covering human services at this time, okay, we got education.
Yeah, I mean, education is next to B500s. There's an adjusted education payment, B505, and that, so when the budget was locked in, there was an estimate on what total education spending would be, which is typical when final budgets are passed and the math is done. There's usually a true up. So this is about a $16 million true up that kind of is the actual spending amount versus what was budgeted for using an estimate. So that you see in 305. And then the other two pieces are, as you remember when the budget passed, you were using estimates of the ADEC impact on both the state teachers and the state employees on how Act 114, which is pension reform, would change the actuarial determined employer contribution. There were estimates that were used. It turns out those were slightly off. Once Act 114 passed, the actuaries took it apart and came out with new estimates. We were, for state employees, able to change our front contribution in answer to those new actuarial estimates because it was before the end of the year. We had some one-time money that you folks specifically set aside, 14.4 million. We could use part of that to make up the additional required contribution. With teachers, it's an appropriation, it's a line item. So you see the true up here, there's an ed fund component to it for the normal cost true up, and then there's a general fund component for the.
And we kind of knew that was going to be done.
So that's just, as advertised, we're just truing that up.
Okay, please do with education. Yeah, okay. So turning to the last page of the more condensed spreadsheet. Conference and Community Development, section B802, Housing and Community Development. This is a technical correction only. This makes the number specified in section B802 align with the amount provided in section D100 A3A and B, which is the portion of section D100, which is the allocation of the property transfer tax. And there was an increase in the amount dispersed to regional planning commissions and municipalities in section D100. The numbers were correct in section D100. They weren't changed in section B802 in order to align. So that's just a technical correction. And I believe that was referenced in the letter of intent.
Now, speaking about community development and planning, there was that whole exchange of emails around intent on brownfields funding.
You'll see that in here.
And, okay. Thank you. I'll just hold my horses then.
Okay. In transportation, B9, section B903, this is, I think, an interesting story to take note of, actually. So in the July eBoard forecast, there was, contrary to our experience in the general fund, there was actually a 1% decline in revenue forecast by the eBoard. And typically that's something that could really put the pinch on a special fund like the T fund. Fortunately, they have essentially a back pocket that they could draw from, which is the Transportation Infrastructure Bond Fund. And you'll recall in BAA last year, we actually retired the TIB bond debt. However, the taxes on fuel sales, which are actually based on the amount of the sale, not on the gallon. So those in our inflationary environment have actually grown, even though they're a much smaller piece of the pie. They're growing, and there's statutory uses that are permissible in addition to retiring, or to servicing bond debt or retiring it. Any projects with an estimated remaining life of 10 years after the work is complete are eligible for utilization of the TIB fund. So what they did was it moved some qualifying expenses there and reduced the regular T fund by that $3.2 million amount. So a positive fiscal story, we thought, would be there. So that concludes the base appropriation adjustments. We do have a number of one-time expenditure, new appropriations. Some of these I would describe as somewhat technical adjustments in nature. Some are definitely qualify as new programs or.
So it's this 3 million at the bottom. Is that related to the governor saying we needed to do more for rural communities?
It is. So I think
I
it's.
don't think we're gonna how many rural communities? It was sort of like we were gonna give, every rural community could expect to get something, but I don't think the 3 million must be a
Well,
grant
what
allocation.
we're providing, Madam Chair, is not necessarily cash for them to spend, but actually providing assistance in applying for competitive grants to draw down. There are, within the American Rescue Plan Act, there are opportunities for acquiring funds through competitive grants, but some communities may lack the resources to really be aware of and know what to apply for. So in addition to the funds automatically received by municipalities, there are other opportunities. And a community with a much larger town office and resources is probably more aware of and able to find and apply for these other competitive grant
Seems like
programs.
3 million, Bobby, makes yours look like peanuts that we put in using the same thinking. And USDA was considered one of the areas where there was great potential to the state. And we put in grant writing support and went through VHCB to work with towns for this very reason. And it was 75,000. So the 3 million should buy an awful lot of grant writing.
So on page 7 of 22 in the language, you'll see.
You were tight with that money.
Well, Bobby, you don't need to look for any more because you've got more than enough right here. 3 million, 75,000 up to 3 million. Huh?
So the,
It's an
We
existing program.
generated millions.
I know,
of
so,
dollars with that.
Do you want us to look at your other documents?
well, I mean, there's a few more one-time we probably should know about, but I just wanted to point out, in the language, there's quite a bit
So
more
how many
description.
grants would 3 million support?
As many as possible is the idea. And so the first step is, I'll refer you to the language, and I really can't speak much to the policy development and details other than what's in the budget language on page 7.
And these are directed,
But
let me ask you, is it, your annotation, is rural capacity, is it because there's special funds that are targeted to rural areas? Or is this your description of your initiative to try to get more grants to
yes,
our rural areas?
so I do know that part of the program's intent is to identify the particular communities that are likely to need assistance and then proactively approach them and engage in identifying potential grant opportunities.
So you're supposed to be able to use some of that money to even hire somebody to manage the money, I believe, right? If you, to help administer the award of the grant, if you receive it. Isn't there money in that 3 million for that for small towns?
There's money to help them manage the grant process. I don't know if there's money to help them manage the actual grant.
We did put money out with the ARPA money, or actually the CRF originally, to the RPCs and to the league to help provide that kind of technical assistance for the use of those federal dollars to make sure that they were in compliance with the federal requirements and so forth. So we did, this is a variation, I guess, on that theme of putting out technical assistance to help municipalities and make sure that they're getting the money. In this case, it was the ARPA money or the CRF money that they were getting. And we wanted the ARPA, I guess, to make sure that what they were spending it on was for permissible purposes and they were dealing with all the fiscal requirements and so forth. I don't know. I think maybe that's what you're thinking of, Bobby, because that was our concern. We didn't want them to get into disallowances or spending money for purposes that weren't permissible under the federal rules, just like, Guidehouse you use as a resource. So I don't know. I suspect once they get the grant, it's going to be up to the municipality to make sure they're complying with the grant and meeting all the reporting requirements. Andy?
Commissioner, is the Rural Infrastructure Assistance Program an existing program that you're putting, so it's going to be created?
That's correct.
And is the Vermont Underserved Communities Index already created, or that will be created
That is,
for
will be created to the extent the money this is approved.
and it's just that index will only be used for this program, or do you envision using it for others?
We don't envision using it for other programs now. That's not to say that it won't have, frankly, utility in other measures too.
And do you have any foresight on what you will use to create the index? Like,
I suspect we'll work with a consultant to do that.
Well, if this works, it would certainly help a lot of small communities that just don't have the ability to even fill out a grant. And
What's the estimated cost for a grant? Somebody must be able to tell you if we're applying for grants. Gus must have some idea of what the cost is in terms of
Producing the
producing
application.
a grant application that, it seems like 3 million should give us a lot.
VHCB could fill us in on that
Did
because they
you-
do
Did
grants.
you project how many would this be enough to support every town? Would you want to make sure that,
only those towns that are 75% or higher on the underserved communities index.
For the first year, yeah. So that's the prioritization.
and
So
how many is that?
We don't know because the index hasn't
it
been.
needs to be determined, right?
And it's also gonna support permitting, application and permitting. That's a huge, that could be huge.
These two.
Am I remembering right that League of Cities and Towns was involved in 75,000? Didn't,
No, the 75,000 grant writer came through VHCB.
okay.
And got ceiling, but we
Seems to-
put money into the league. We
Yeah.
funded, I can't remember, was it 375? Maybe in the end, 600,000 to the league. And then we gave money to the RPCs as well
Right,
to
so
work with towns.
I'm getting deja vu because we have these discussions about helping the small towns through the league and through the other organizations. But I mean, I think it's great, but I think Jane is right. 3 million is a kind of an eye-popping number for grant writing, especially since it's limited to this small subset of the town.
Is it,
But we don't know how big that
Yeah.
subset is. It might be,
We don't, do you know what has happened with the previous?
with the grant writing that we had through VHCB, that 75,000 had generated millions, several millions of dollars in return. So the return is very good.
Yeah.
Yes, Senator.
so, unlike some of the other grants that you might, what's the scope of what they envision? Is it just the writing of the grants, or is it like engineering or any of the stuff to get ready?
I think, I mean, again, you can reference the language, but I think it's more focused on the grants and providing needs assessments with this.
HCCG, yeah.
And just again, referring to the language in black and white, and I was not,
I see the language what's in black and white.
the community, I was gonna add, so community needs assessments to evaluate need is directed by a municipality in the following categories: water quality, infrastructure improvement, housing development, community recovery, workforce development, business supports, climate change mitigation. I haven't gone to the next page yet, but community needs assessments are something that is different than writing a grant. And that's something that probably costs more money with a different kind of consultant to identify needs as described there. So I guess parsing through the language, it sounds like it's more than just simply grant writing, I guess. And so the metric of how much does it cost to write a grant and break it down, may not be strictly applicable.
The last bullet says project management and implementation support to assist the success.
That's why I saw it.
So the answer to Senator West's question.
And one small sewage treatment plant in a small village will eat up half of this money. So I'm not, the devil in this is all in the details.
Well, I guess we'll have the folks from ACCD come in, and I assume that they must have done some kind of a white paper in terms of describing this.
Yeah, I think this
we
would
would
be,
have the benefit of seeing.
if the agency of administration actually is going to write for it on this.
Yeah, and they are, so,
So it would be Deputy Commissioner, Deputy Secretary Farnham person.
all right, can, you make a note of it and tell them to be prepared to, answer some of our questions to flesh out. I mean, it's a new initiative, and when you look at, the community needs and what's in there, 3 million could go pretty quickly, depending on how expansive or who got in line first, or the extent to which are you gonna prioritize? There may be great variation in terms of,
This includes any engineering, rewriting the grant. This
don't know,
money will
usually
be
grant-
used, like due before the sun.
well, unless the grant can somehow, you can include engineering as part of your grant writing. So anyway, we'll want to spend a bit more time on this, because this is a new initiative, and this is what the governor was talking about in his speech, is that to connect it.
Yeah.
It certainly isn't.
I can see quite a few small towns have a town administrator. But some of those may work for 2 towns, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And some towns have the town clerk is sort of the administrator of the town, or the road foreman. And like number 4, I mean, when I first read this, I thought number 4 was probably one of the most important parts for a lot of small towns that has no town administrator or town manager. And
This is it's a pretty big tent here, of what potentially could be covered under it, so, so this is,
suck up 20 grand, like.
okay. Well, let's keep going, we're getting close to 3, and we're going to move on to another topic.
The second item in the one-time general fund appropriations, $3.345 million. Also to the AOA Secretary's office. This is something I would describe as more of a classic technical adjustment in a budget adjustment act. This basically is to account for the fact that beginning July 1, 2022, we are now faced with a 10% match requirement for COVID-related FEMA funding. So that was previously 100% funding for COVID-related FEMA funds that were being received by the state. As of that date, a 10% match is required. And so this is really a calculated number that's been calculated as what is required to come up with this match for costs incurred since that date. And it's being proposed as one appropriation to the Secretary's office to then dole out as needed, really for the simplicity that affords, and so that we don't have a budget adjustment worksheet that's 20 pages long, essentially. But that's what's going on with this appropriation. Are there any questions, or I'm sure the Secretary's office can speak more to this when you have them about the previous issue.
No, are you talking about Secretary of Administration?
Yes, because it's an appropriation to the Secretary of Administration.
I see that road capacity is also to AOA, not
That's correct.
ACCD.
That's correct. Yeah.
But ACCD should be the one to give us the details on the proposal.
I believe, as Commissioner Gresham advised, the Secretary of Administration's office should probably be your first contact to learn more about the rural capacity grants. I believe they've worked with ACCD, but it's really being run through the Secretary of Administration's office. Yeah. They may wish to bring colleagues along from ACCD, but Secretary of Administration would be the point.
So these one times in total are 56, almost 57 million that are here.
They are, and with the lion's share being the $30 million appropriation to serve as state match for a $67 million.
Yeah, we heard from Christine Holquist.
Okay, so you're all set on this, yep. I will mention, because it's somewhat unusual, the $1.7 million to ADS is matching funds for a grant application for USGS funds that are available once every 8 years for light detection and reading the LiDAR program. So this is the aerial photography. It's got to be done before leaf out. So that's why it's in BAA as opposed to budget, so that the planes can fly before leaf out. And one of the benefits to the state is, really additional revenue that can be gained through the tax mapping advantage. Sure.
Chair,
Yes.
I have a question on number 32, the 5 million for PHIP. Is that because all the other PHIP money was spent, or?
That program has
Yeah.
been
It's a big
going
success.
strong,
Yeah.
a huge success.
And the big one here after the 30 is almost the 9.2, and that's youth inpatient facility, Southwest Medical.
So
But that's still still a lot more work to be
you
done.
should have gotten a letter, I think.
I mean, as to whether this should be a budget adjustment or.
No, I think it was from the Department of Mental Health, and I committed to stepping in and get you some information prior.
But, okay.
before I got
Well,
here.
it just seems like if we're talking about youth inpatient, obviously Brattleboro Retreat is the one for mental health. This would give, no offense to you, Senator
No,
from
go ahead.
Bennington, but this gives those youth facilities that this one comes on board that are essentially on the Massachusetts border. And I was just thinking about some geographical access
Right.
for, for youth around the state. And so it raised the question about, maybe it's for a variety of reasons. The question is, what are the reasons for that site location as opposed to something that might be a little more central, so that you don't have both of them really involving such small distances for families or.
So the Department of Mental
Yeah.
Health put out an RFP. You'll recall that it was going to be UEM that was going to build this out. They ran into financial challenges, they backed out. Department of Mental Health then put out an RFP, one response. Southwest Vermont Medical Center was the only respondent.
Okay.
So we started the process with them. And the only other thing I would say, because I think mental health, Commissioner Hawes can give you much more background, but these beds are not duplicative of what's in Brattleboro. I meant to be complimentary.
No,
These are for different
I know we
clients.
need a more capacity. I'm just
They're both
talking,
on the southern border.
I'm talking about,
But they were the only ones, I mean, if you wanted
Actually, I was
something-
talking to a new senator today in Franklin County, talking about how difficult it is to get to Bennington. And of course, it works both ways. It's difficult to get to Franklin County from Bennington too. It is a 2.5 hour drive from Montpelier. So if, I must say that one of the advantages of remote technology that we found is we had a lot more parents visiting kids in Bennington from around the state over remotely than ever showed up when they didn't have that capability. But anyway, that's not ideal. Kids closer to their homes.
I know you're not.
Yeah, but I do appreciate the willingness of the Southern Vermont communities to take these programs that some programs in other parts of, some communities in the other parts of the state are refusing to host.
I mean, it was quite eye-opening to us. And we hope it works out, but, there's a long way to go. They need to scope out a plan. When they have a plan, they need to get a certificate of need.
I gotta go on duty at 6:30 down in Bennington.
And you need to be there on time.
I'll have to replace people.
Drive safe.
Thank you.
Hopefully, there's not much snow on the way.
I hope not. I hope I beat that. But we'll see.
I just have to catch up with it. Sorry.
Why don't
So, Madam Chair, there's just one more highlight.
That 40 million?
There is one more new program, like rural capacity grants, which is new. There's the New American Employment Supports for New Americans. That's the very bottom of page 9 of the language, and the appropriation amount is $350,000. This too is a new program, and actually it started from a request that we got actually from the Brattleboro Development Corps to help kind of ease some of the financial burden that they've had resettling refugees and new Americans, not necessarily all refugees. And so we kind of broadened the program, increased the amount, and this will be run through the Agency of Human Services, Tracy Dolan's group, Refugee and Resettlement Office. She will have a fair amount to say on it, but the reason it's in budget adjustment is because they are seeing this stuff now. I mean, this is happening. I mean,
We're
that's-
seeing also pressure is for the asylum seekers, and I guess they're just on their own. And the big concern is that they really would like to work, but the federal government issuance of work permits, it's an incredibly long process. And so they have no ability to support themselves, and they have no income, and they have no benefits. And the host families, I think, we did deal with, if one of them could manage to get a work permit, that individual's income didn't end up having an adverse effect on their property taxes if they were paying residential taxes based on income. But so I know that those organizations are wishing to get some kind of support for that group of new Americans.
Can you give them a work permit and stay remote?
So Senator Lyons, and then we're going to wrap up on this, and then we're going to go back into more detail.
Yeah, no, I would just be interested in how this differs from what the refugee resettlement programs are currently doing in this area. Because I'm familiar with some of their work, but I don't know how significantly different or improved this is.
Well, we
Or is
can-
this a redundancy?
So this is something new and different in that the Refugee Resettlement Office did receive a $500,000 appropriation in the middle last year. And that was really to provide direct aid from the office to refugees. And this is for granting to organizations that help refugees. So organizations, or communities around the state, statewide, can draw on from this pool of grant funds to organizations that then do the help or may already be helping. And the way it came up initially was Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation is doing a lot of work that is not part of their typical mission, but they've now got someone working just full time on trying to help with some of these situations. And so there may be other situations around the state as well like this. So a pool of grant money to organizations, it's not going directly from the state's office to individual refugees.
But I guess it raises the question, these are state dollars, and we're putting it toward this group of people coming. And for the asylees or the host families and the organizations that are serving them, they're saying, should there be something that help us with these individuals? And some of them are from countries in Africa and where
We
they,
have the African American program.
so we need to see, I mean, maybe 350 can't address, I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that they're feeling that they're getting, they're seeing a great need, and there's just nothing out there for that particular population, because they can't qualify for benefits and so forth. So we can talk to Tracy about it when she
What,
comes
why
in.
are only 4 counties listed though? You've got Brattleboro, Bennington,
That's not meant to be all inclusive. It's meant to represent that that's where they're seeing the most pressure, but that's not at all meant to be all.
So any,
GovOps folks, should they wait?
No, we need to wrap up and so they can come in. And,
So there could be other communities.
well,
Madam Chair, we always do our best to hide some surprises in the language just to make sure you guys read it. And we're very happy that, to come back and, you know. take the last few minutes and
all
have
right.
your leisure.
Well, appreciate your overview and questions, and we will get more detail from the individual agencies and departments, but this is, I think, very helpful. So thank you for coming in.
You're welcome.
And now we're going to do, we have joint with
You got a one.
Senate GovOps, and I'm going to look at what we have for capacity, because I think we may be pushing the boundaries.
To have the other committee in.
We can do it on.
the chair can change.
Well, I think it's, yeah, I think it's easier
Chris
to
is the
have,
one that has this thing.
it's easier if they can come in person.